Hello and welcome to YTV. I'm Raleigh Cavero. Tonight, the YDN and YTV hosted the Ward 1 Aldermanic debates. Right now, the race is leading up to the big day, November 5th next week, in which Democratic incumbent Sarah Idelson will face off against her Republican challenger, Paul Chandler. The race has been heating up since students got back to campus. However, it really started back last spring, whenever in April, Paul Chandler announced his intentions to run, and in May, Sarah Idelson announced her intentions to run for re-election. Tonight, we bring in special correspondent Isaac Stanley-Becker. He's been covering this race since the spring. So he's going to give us some insight onto the debate tonight and what voters should be thinking about when they go to the ballot boxes next week on November 5th. Isaac, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
So, first question, what was the most enlightening moment of the debate tonight?
Yeah, I think there were a lot of really good substantive clashes that we saw tonight. I think one of the most interesting moments was the question about whether the primary responsibility of the Ward 1 Alder is to be involved in the process of passing legislation or to really work towards involving students, Yale students, in the process of city government. And Sarah was really adamant that those two things are not mutually exclusive, that they're intertwined and that one necessarily involves the other. Whereas Paul was really more willing to kind of take a definitive position. He said that if he had to choose, he would say that involving Yale students in the process of city government is more important than the Ward 1 alderperson passing legislation. And I think this is interesting because it kind of speaks to their different pitch as candidates. Sarah has really emphasized her prior work on the board and her relationship with the other aldermen and women, whereas Paul has been more adamant about his engagement with students, his status as a current student, and how he would really be a voice for current students on the Board of Aldermen.
All right, great. So Isaac, what should voters look for next week?
Yeah, I think that voters going to the polls on November 5th should be looking at a couple of things. First is really important, just the candidate's experience and demonstrated knowledge of the city and of the ward and of really the work that goes into being a legislator on the Board of Aldermen. Sarah talked about her work prior to running for election as a Dwight Hall Education Fellow, work on other campaigns. Paul talked about growing up in Westport, having experience in things like public education, being interested in those issues, and that's important. I think the second thing is real willingness to engage with students on campus and to listen to their needs and to be conscious of the fact that they are representing students, that they are a student voice in the Board of Aldermen. The third thing I would say is candidness and willingness to respond honestly to questions. I think that's important because when we move from the campaign to actual governance, it's important that a lot of these ideals and professed values for the city actually turn into real legislative priorities for whichever candidate is successful.
Okay, and so talking about professed values and candidness and answering questions, tell us a little bit about the strongest moment you saw from each candidate tonight.
Sure. I think that Sarah's strongest moment was when she discussed her work on the board over the last 2 years. I think that the Board of Aldermen and sometimes these committee meetings can seem sort of arcane and distant from student life. And I think that Sarah was good at talking about the work that she's done for youth, the way that she's advocated for community policing, the way that she's been the board's liaison to the Economic Development Commission, and I think she was good at making those issues clear to students. I think that Paul's strongest moment was talking about his engagement over the past weeks and months with students on campus. With sweet meet and greets, with lunches, poster campaigns, Paul has really done a good job of getting his name out there and making sure that students know that he's interested in their ideas and that he's willing to take them seriously as contributors to his campaign and then to ultimately his position on the board if he should win.
And how about the weaknesses? What were the weakest moments?
I think that Sarah could have done a better job of answering the question about a specific policy that Ward 1 constituents could expect in her next term. She spoke about her accomplishments over the last 2 years, but even to say, well, I've been working on youth issues, here's one thing that might tangibly happen in the next months or in the next year, I think would have been effective. As for Paul, I think that he could have been more persuasive on some of these lines of attacks. His campaign has put in a lot of effort into developing a couple of lines of attacks against Sarah, including her perceived lack of presence on campus and her affiliation with Local 34, the local union, the local Unite Here union that represents clerical and technical workers at the university. And I think that Paul could have explained these issues better. He could have pushed further and pushed more explicitly and more clearly about what exactly the problem was and how he thought that Sarah was part of a perceived union bloc on the Board of Aldermen.
All right, and we actually have that soundbite, so we'll roll that for you.
This next question comes from Lee Green Low. Should Yale pay property taxes to New Haven? And what should the financial responsibility of Yale be to the city in general?
To me first, go ahead. Well, first of all, Yale is the biggest property taxpayer in the city in properties that aren't specifically university. In addition, we do make voluntary contributions to the city. Yale has a financial responsibility, it's true, as does the state. We rely on them for a lot of our revenues, but it shouldn't be the only responsibility in the city. We shouldn't be getting 40% or a little bit more of our budget from the state and relying on revenues from what Yale pays us. We need to develop our other avenues. We need to expand our job base. Right now we have 47,000 living wage jobs in New Haven for 130,000 people. That's just not enough. It's going to take a lot more than just, pushing the cash cow of Yale for more finances and more resources to actually solve our revenue problems. It's developing our infrastructure. It's working on making New Haven a business-friendly place, which starts with having a stable and tax rate that's not fluctuating depending on how much state aid we get. Right now it's through the roof. 43 point is absurd. I can see why business owners don't want to open shop here. I think we need to have more of a transparent zoning law process so they know what they're getting into before the start. So they can say, hey, this is what I expect of my development. Take the politics out of that process a little bit. And yeah, we will start expanding our job base. But it's not just Yale's not the catch-all for all the city resources.
Alderman Miles.
Yeah, I think this is another place that people look when we're trying to engage with the real revenue crisis that we face as a city. And I do think that the fact that nearly half of property in the entire city of New Haven is tax exempt contributes to our revenue crisis. It used to be that 75% of the loss from that was reimbursed to us by the state through a payment in lieu of taxes program called Pilot. Over the past decade, that amount has fallen to less than half of that, and we are really feeling the results of that here, right? It's a huge amount of money. So going forward, we need to lobby the state to fully fund Pilot, for one thing, and to really follow through on that commitment. It makes a huge difference for us here. In terms of Yale's financial responsibility, absolutely. I think that Yale should be doing more. Right now, in the face of this crisis, we all need to be doing more to figure out the solutions to this challenge. And New Haven Works, the program I was mentioning before, I think is one of the strongest examples we've seen possibly ever of real partnership between the university and the city, where from the outset, on the Board of Aldermen and the city staff, we were reaching out directly to the university and working together so that that's a commitment in leadership as well as a financial commitment.
I'd like to respond quickly.
This is your last one. We have 6
I don't think that relying on the state more or expecting more of the state is the solution. Yeah, they did promise that, but the fact of the matter is they're in a worse financial situation than us. We had 300,000 people leave Connecticut over the last 5 years, I think. We're running one of the biggest budget deficits in the country. Assuming the state is going to be our solution, that they're going to be able to borrow and continue to finance us, is not a sustainable end goal. We need to be looking at what we can do, how we can remain independent, so that we're not looking at the state for every single problem. So that anytime we want to open a community center, we don't have to turn it into a half a library and go up to Hartford and try and get funds for it. We need to be able to pay for things on our own, and that starts with just taking an objective stance of what we can and can't do, and providing and inspiring businesses to come here and hire us.
Can I respond or?
Yes, you need your second.
Thank you. Well, I'd like to speak to the development piece of this, because I do think that economic development is an extremely important component of the answer also. I spoke a little bit about my work on the Development Commission. I think that there are a couple of things that we do absolutely need to do to bring more development downtown and throughout the city. Downtown, we need to increase our density, and I supported doing that through a couple of changes we have this year process more standard so that we can have greater density. We also need to really invest in the key corridors throughout other neighborhoods in the city, on Dixwell Avenue, Congress, Whaley. We need to invest in those corridors and make them more hospitable to small business development, because those are the places where that's going to come. And those are the priorities that I've carried into my work on the commission.
And finally, Isaac, tell us something after covering this race for many months most people don't know about the Aldermanic race that you think would be pretty relevant when they're going to make a decision next week.
Sure. So one of the questions tonight referred to Yale's contributions to the city and whether Yale should be doing more monetarily for the city. And this is an interesting and really complex issue that sort of gets to the heart of Yale's relationship with New Haven and town-gown relations over the past decade. So many of the properties in the city are tax exempt, which causes a revenue problem for the city because the city gets a lot of its money from property taxes. Because they're nonprofits, Yale and places like the New Haven Hospital and other nonprofits don't have to pay property taxes. So what's happened is that Yale has agreed to pay a fair portion of involuntary contributions, has agreed to give a certain amount of money to the city every year, and also there are programs set up such as the payment in lieu of taxes at the state level, or pilot, that reimburses the city for some of this in understanding that they're not getting their fair share because a lot of these properties are tax exempt. So the question was, do you think Yale should be doing more? And there were some interesting sort of disagreements here. I think that Sarah answered the question head on and said, basically yes, the university could be doing more. We all need to be doing more in this time of real budget hardship for the city. Sarah also talked about how the city needs to be engaged in lobbying at the state level and making sure that the city is getting its fair share in terms of pilot funding. That's the payment in lieu of taxes funding from the state, which has been cut over the past years. Whereas Paul said that the universities are already doing a lot, and he also said that it can't just be about state funding, that the city really needs to come up with more sustainable and better streams of revenue within the city. That means economic development, that means luring businesses into the city.
Thank you so much, Isaac.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching. I'm sure all of you will appreciate the coverage of the debates tonight as well as the race, since you're going to try to make some very educated decisions next week at the ballot boxes. Please stay tuned to YTV and the YDN's print coverage of the Aldermanic race, and we'll see you on Sunday at 5. Thanks so much.